I am Rachel, 33 years old, and right now my family is trying to break down my front door. Open this door right now, Rachel, or I am calling the police and having them kick it in. The heavy oak door of my Lake Tahoe villa shuddered under the weight of my brother-in-law Jamal slamming his fists against it. Through the reinforced glass, I could see my mother Patricia standing right behind him holding her phone up high. She was live streaming to her hundreds of followers. "Look at this, everyone!" She yelled into her phone, her voice shrill and trembling with fake tears. "Look at the daughter who is abusing her own family. She is trying to steal everything from us and leave her sister homeless." What she did not tell her audience was that the house she was trying to break into was legally mine. What Jamal did not understand as he screamed about his legal rights was that he was currently committing a federal offense on camera. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch toxic family members dig their own graves. I stood in the entryway, perfectly calm, holding a warm mug of coffee. I watched their absolute meltdown on the high-definition security monitors mounted on the wall. As a forensic certified public accountant who managed wealth for some of the most ruthless executives in Silicon Valley, I dealt with corporate sharks for a living. The temper tantrums of my sister Brittany and her husband Jamal were nothing but amateur hour to me. Jamal kicked the door again, shouting a string of real estate buzzwords he probably learned from a podcast that morning. He demanded I hand over the deed. He threatened to call the local sheriff. I just took another sip of my coffee and smiled. They were acting incredibly arrogant for people who had zero understanding of how federal trusts or property laws actually worked. They thought brute force and public shaming would make me cave. They thought I was still the quiet, compliant scapegoat of the family. To understand how we ended up on this porch with my mother crying fake tears for the internet and my brother-in-law risking serious jail time, we have to go back exactly 48 hours to a very quiet, very expensive law office in San Francisco. 2 days earlier, the atmosphere in the conference room of Montgomery and Associates was thick with greed. My grandparents had tragically passed away in a private plane crash the month before. It was a devastating loss for me, but for my family, it was nothing more than a lottery ticket waiting to be cashed. Brittany sat across from me at the massive mahogany table, wearing a designer dress she definitely could not afford. Jamal sat next to her, tapping his expensive watch, whispering to her about which luxury yacht they were going to put a down payment on by the end of the week. My parents, Patricia and Richard, sat at the head of the table looking incredibly smug. They always treated Brittany as the golden child, convinced she deserved the world just for existing. The senior partner of the firm cleared his throat and opened the thick leather binder containing the final testament of my grandparents. He read through the standard legal jargon for what felt like hours. Jamal huffed in annoyance, muttering under his breath for the lawyer to just get to the numbers. Then the lawyer turned the page and dropped the bombshell that shattered their entire reality. I leave my entire estate, including all liquid assets, investment portfolios, and the primary residence located in Lake Tahoe entirely and exclusively to my granddaughter Rachel. The total estate value was $80 million. The lawyer paused, looking directly at my family. The will stipulates that Brittany and Jamal are to receive absolutely nothing. The silence in the room was so absolute it was deafening. I watched the color completely drain from Brittany's face. Jamal stopped tapping his watch. His jaw dropped. Then the explosion happened. Patricia slammed her hands on the table and shot out of her chair. "This is a mistake," she screamed, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "This is completely invalid. They would never leave everything to her. Brittany is a mother. Brittany needs that money for her family. Rachel is just a greedy, selfish spinster." Richard nodded along, his face turning red with anger. I sat perfectly still, letting their outrage wash over me. When Patricia finally paused to catch her breath, I looked her dead in the eye. "You want to talk about who deserves what?" I asked quietly, my voice cutting through their hysteria. 5 years ago, Grandpa had his first major stroke. He needed round-the-clock care and rehabilitation. "Where were you, Mom?" "You and Brittany were on a 3-week luxury vacation in Cabo San Lucas, charging margaritas to his credit card." And Jamal, you were busy losing $200,000 of Grandpa's money on a ridiculous cryptocurrency scam. I was the one who moved into the hospital. I was the one who managed his care, audited his failing businesses, and saved this family from bankruptcy. This is not just an inheritance. This is the result of years of loyalty that none of you ever showed. Jamal stood up his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You listen to me, Rachel," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I know exactly how you manipulated them. You isolated them when they were sick and weak. My lawyer is going to tear this garbage will to shreds. You will not see a single dime of that 80 million. I am going to make sure you lose everything." I simply stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the room. Let him try, I thought. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was perfectly quiet, a sharp contrast to the screaming match I just left behind. Before I even reached my car, my phone started vibrating violently in my purse. I pulled it out to find a barrage of text messages from Brittany. She was not the type to process rejection quietly. The messages came in rapid succession, painting a vivid picture of her absolute delusion. "How dare you humiliate me in front of Jamal? That money is meant for my family, not a childless workaholic. You need to sign over the deed to the lake house by tomorrow, or we are taking you to court. Mom is having a panic attack because of you. I am calling the police if you do not answer me. You stole my baby's future. Do the right thing for once in your life." I stood by my car reading the frantic demands. Brittany genuinely believed that the universe owed her an $80 million estate simply because she existed and gave birth to a child. She had never worked a day in her adult life, surviving entirely on my parents funding her luxury lifestyle, while Jamal jumped from one failed get-rich-quick scheme to another. Now that their primary funding source was gone, panic was setting in. I did not reply. Engaging with an adult throwing a digital temper tantrum was a waste of billable hours. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove back to my apartment, assuming their threats were just empty noise. I severely underestimated how desperate and reckless my family could be when denied their prize. The next morning started like any other Tuesday. I woke up early, made a pot of strong coffee, and opened my laptop at the kitchen island to check my daily financial briefings. My morning routine always included a quick sweep of my personal checking and savings accounts before diving into my wealthy clients' portfolios. I opened my banking application, typed in my secure password, and waited for the familiar dashboard to load. Instead of my balances, a glaring red error message flashed across the entire screen. "Account suspended. Please contact your branch administrator immediately." I blinked, setting my coffee mug down. I refreshed the page. The same red warning stared back at me. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I quickly logged into a different browser to access my secondary emergency fund at a completely different financial institution. Red letters again. Access denied. Account frozen under legal hold. I tried a third account, a small high-yield savings I rarely touched. Frozen. My family had actually struck their first blow. They did not just send angry text messages. They had gone straight for my throat. Freezing personal accounts across multiple banking institutions required serious legal intervention, which meant they found a lawyer desperate or shady enough to file an emergency order without proper evidentiary hearings. Jamal had promised to make sure I lost everything, and he was apparently starting with my grocery money. They thought cutting off my cash flow would break my spirit. They expected me to panic, to call them crying, to beg for access to my own funds in exchange for giving up the estate. They were treating me like the dependent, helpless child they always wanted me to be. I did not panic. I did not cry. Instead, I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to the regional manager at my primary bank, a man whose high net worth clients I had personally audited and saved from tax audits for years. He picked up on the second ring, his voice incredibly apologetic. "Rachel, I am so sorry," he said immediately. "My hands are tied on this one. We received a court-ordered temporary freeze early this morning." I pulled up a blank notepad on my screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Who filed the injunction?" I asked, my voice completely steady. Your parents, Richard and Patricia? He replied, sounding deeply uncomfortable. They filed an emergency affidavit claiming elder abuse and financial manipulation. They are alleging that you used your position as a financial advisor to coerce your grandparents into changing their will while they were experiencing cognitive decline. The court froze your accounts pending a full investigation into the stolen funds. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They were weaponizing the very legal protections designed to save vulnerable seniors, using them to try and extort me. Thank you for the information, I told the bank manager. I will handle it from here. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The initial shock completely evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating precision that made me one of the top forensic accountants in the state. Instead of seeing a devastating family betrayal, I saw a massive, glaring legal vulnerability. To file that specific injunction, my parents and Jamal had to swear under penalty of perjury that I had manipulated my grandparents recently. They had to submit false affidavits to a federal judge. Filing a false affidavit for financial gain was not just a minor civil dispute. It was perjury. It was a felony. I opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop labeled Grandparents' Trust. As a forensic CPA, I did not operate on emotions. I operated on paper trails, timestamped documents, and bulletproof legal structures. If they wanted to accuse me of financial crimes, they were about to learn exactly what happens when you pick a fight with someone who builds financial fortresses for a living. I smiled to myself, closing the laptop. The game had officially begun, and their first move was a colossal mistake. I grabbed my car keys and headed straight for the upscale suburb where my parents lived. The drive gave me 20 minutes to mentally compartmentalize any lingering emotional hurt. I was not a daughter visiting her childhood home. I was a forensic auditor walking into a hostile corporate takeover. As I turned onto their quiet cul-de-sac, the first thing I noticed was the glaring anomaly parked in their pristine driveway. It was a brand new midnight blue Porsche Cayenne. The temporary dealer plates were still catching the morning sun. Standing right next to it, holding an iced coffee and wearing sunglasses, was my sister Brittany. She was speaking over the immaculate hedge to Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip. I rolled down my window just enough to catch the end of her sentence. Yes, it is quite the upgrade, Brittany laughed loudly, waving her hand to show off her fresh manicure. With the upcoming inheritance finally settling, Jamal and I decided we needed a safer vehicle for the baby. Plus, we will be spending so much time at the Lake Tahoe property this summer, we needed something that handles mountain roads. My stomach turned from the sheer audacity of her delusion. The grandparents had been dead barely a month, the will had been read 48 hours ago, and she was already spending money she did not have. I parked my sedan right behind the Porsche and stepped out. The smug smile on Brittany's face vanished. Mrs. Gable excused herself and scurried back into her house, sensing the immediate drop in temperature. Brittany crossed her arms. "What are you doing here, Rachel?" she snapped. "I am here to talk to the people who just committed perjury," I replied, walking past her toward the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open. My father, Richard, stood in the threshold, wearing an expensive golf polo, looking deeply uncomfortable, but trying to mask it with stern authority. My mother, Patricia, appeared right over his shoulder, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "We have nothing to say to you unless your lawyer is present," Patricia announced, crossing her arms in an exact mirror image of Brittany. I stood my ground on the manicured front lawn. "You froze my personal bank accounts," I said, keeping my voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You filed an emergency injunction claiming I committed elder abuse against Grandpa. You and I both know that is a complete fabrication." Richard stepped out onto the porch, holding up his hands in a weak, placating gesture. "Now, Rachel, let us not use ugly words like fabrication. We are simply doing what is fair for the whole family. You have to understand how this looks from the outside. You isolated your grandfather in his final years and somehow walked away with an $80 million estate. We had to take protective measures to ensure the assets were distributed equitably." I stared at the man who had raised me with profound disgust. "Protective measures," I repeated coldly. You mean lying to a federal judge under oath? Grandpa was completely lucid and his primary physician signed off on his competency. You froze my money to punish me, Patricia sneered. You have been manipulating this family for years. We are simply freezing the assets until the court forces you to share what rightfully belongs to your sister. Just then, the front door opened wider and Jamal strolled out. He was dressed in a linen suit, looking like he had just stepped off a luxury yacht. He walked down the porch steps with the swagger of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. He slipped his arm around Brittany's waist and gave me a condescending smile. "Let us all calm down," Jamal said, using his smooth salesman voice. "There is no need for this to get ugly, Rachel. We are reasonable people. We know court battles can be expensive and exhausting. Nobody wants to see you go to prison for financial fraud." I looked at Jamal taking in the tailored suit and the shiny new Porsche in the driveway. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, oblivious to the legal landmine he was dancing on. "Is that so?" I asked. "And what exactly is your reasonable solution, Jamal?" He chuckled, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "It is simple. You sign over 70% of the entire estate to me and Brittany. You get to keep 30%. In exchange, your parents will drop the elder abuse injunction today, the frozen accounts will be released by tomorrow morning, and we all walk away as a happy family." I did not take the paper. I just stared at him, letting the heavy silence stretch until his arrogant smile faltered. "You are actively offering to drop a felony accusation in exchange for a direct financial payout," I stated clearly. Jamal frowned, his chest puffing out aggressively. "I am offering you a lifeline, Rachel. Take the deal or you will not afford a cup of coffee by next week." I took a slow step closer to him, dropping my voice to a sharp whisper. "You just purchased a six-figure car, Jamal. Since my accounts are frozen and I know for a fact you were denied a mortgage refinancing 3 months ago, that means you bought that Porsche using a high-interest bridge loan. You are leveraging money you do not have against an estate you do not own." He stiffened visibly, his eyes darting to Brittany. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "What you just offered me on this lawn is the definition of extortion. I told them, turning my back to walk to my car. Enjoy the new car smell while it lasts. You are going to need a lot more than my grocery money to pay for the federal defense attorneys you are going to need." I got into my car and drove away without looking back. The trap was set, and they walked right into it. The week following the confrontation on my parents' front lawn was defined by absolute silence. I did not call them. I did not text them. I did not even contact my bank to formally protest the frozen accounts. In the world of forensic accounting, silence is not a sign of surrender. It is a strategic mechanism to let the opposition become overconfident. My family, however, interpreted my lack of communication as total defeat. They assumed I was sitting in my apartment, paralyzed by fear and financially suffocated by their legal maneuver. Without resistance, to keep them grounded, their arrogance spiraled out of control. Brittany predictably could not resist gloating. My phone lit up constantly with her daily updates. Instead of asking how I was surviving without access to my money, she sent me screenshots of high-end interior design catalogs. She texted photos of Italian leather sectionals, custom dining tables, and expensive rugs. "Just ordered this for the great room in Tahoe," she wrote on a Tuesday morning. "The delivery company needs the gates unlocked by next Friday. I hope you have your bags packed by then, because I am not paying for a storage unit for your junk." Another text arrived on Thursday, featuring a picture of a massive crystal chandelier. "Jamal says we are going to hire a private chef for the summer weekends. You really should have taken his deal, Rachel. Now you get nothing." I read every single message, archived them into my meticulously organized legal evidence folder, and went right back to my remote work. I knew Jamal was running out of time. Bridge loans are notoriously aggressive with interest rates that compound daily. He needed the deed to legitimize his fraudulent borrowings, and he needed it immediately to secure a permanent mortgage before the private lenders came looking for their money. His desperation was brewing. On the 7th day of my strategic silence, The moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. It was late Friday afternoon when a notification popped up on my computer screen. It was an email from Jamal, and the subject line was simply labeled Official Legal Transfer. No pleasantries, no formal greeting, just a single PDF attachment and 2 sentences. Here is the proof that the Lake Tahoe house belongs to my wife. The eviction team will be there next week to remove you by force if necessary. I clicked on the attachment, my pulse remaining perfectly steady. A scanned document appeared on my high-resolution monitor. At the top, in bold, aggressive lettering, it read, Quitclaim Deed. According to this piece of paper, my grandparents had willingly and legally transferred the complete ownership of their $80 million Lake Tahoe estate directly to Brittany. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page where the signatures were located. There, in sprawling cursive, were the names of my grandfather and grandmother. Right beside their names was a date. It was dated exactly 2 days before the private plane crash that took their lives. The narrative Jamal was trying to construct was painfully obvious but fundamentally flawed. He wanted the world to believe that right before their fatal trip, my grandparents had a sudden change of heart, realized Brittany was the rightful heir, and signed the property over to her in secret. It was a bold, reckless move. He was using this piece of paper as his golden ticket to bypass the actual will that had been read in the lawyer office. This was the document he had undoubtedly shown to his shady lenders to secure the loan for his new Porsche. This was the weapon he intended to use to throw me out onto the street. He probably assumed that the sight of my grandparents' signatures would break my resolve. He thought I would look at the dense legal jargon, panic about the impending eviction by aggressive private contractors, and finally sign the settlement agreement he had offered on the lawn to save myself from homelessness. Instead of panicking, I zoomed in on the document until the digital ink blurred into individual pixels. Jamal was a fast talker, but he was a terrible criminal. The forgery was so incredibly clumsy, it was almost insulting. First, I looked at the notary stamp pressed onto the bottom right corner of the page. It belonged to a public notary based in Los Angeles, California. 2 days before they died, my grandparents were attending a highly publicized charity gala in Chicago. There was zero possibility they sat in front of a California notary to sign away their most valuable asset. Second, the signatures themselves were entirely wrong. My grandfather had suffered a minor stroke 5 years ago that left him with a distinct documented tremor in his right hand. Every legal document he signed after that incident had a slight, unmistakable shake in the lettering. The signature on the fake deed Jamal sent was smooth fluid and written with heavy, confident pressure. It was a digital tracing of an old signature, most likely lifted from a Christmas card or an outdated tax return. Finally, the date format was written in the European style, a bizarre habit Jamal had picked up during his short, failed stint trading international cryptocurrency. My grandfather, a proud American traditionalist who was meticulous about paperwork, never wrote his dates that way in his entire life. I leaned back in my office chair, staring at the screen with a mixture of profound disgust and absolute triumph. Jamal had just transmitted a forged legal document across state lines using an electronic communication network in an attempt to extort a massive financial asset. He had crossed the line from a nasty family dispute into a textbook case of federal wire fraud. I saved the PDF to 3 separate encrypted hard drives, backed it up to a secure cloud server, and firmly locked my office computer system. The trap was officially set, and the heavy steel jaws were now ready to snap shut. I unlocked my secondary workstation, the one dedicated entirely to forensic financial investigations. I did not need to use illegal hacking tools, dark web access, or any cinematic magic to dismantle my brother-in-law. Financial criminals always leave a paper trail, and arrogant ones leave a massive glaring highway. I started my search within public county records and cross-referenced those documents with federal tax filings and corporate registries. Jamal had always bragged loudly at family dinners about his brilliant investments, So I began by looking into the limited liability companies registered under his name. I found 3 entities. 2 had already been dissolved by the state for failing to pay basic franchise taxes, but the third, Apex Pinnacle Holdings, was still active. I pulled the corporate filings and traced the registered bank accounts attached to the business. It did not take a genius to find the massive hemorrhage of funds. Over the past 8 months, Jamal had systematically liquidated all of his and Brittany's personal savings, funneled the cash through his shell company, and dumped the money into an obscure, highly volatile offshore cryptocurrency exchange. He had fallen for a classic pump and dump scheme marketed by internet influencers. The digital ledger showed frantic escalating buy orders on a coin that had completely crashed just 3 weeks before my grandparents died in that plane crash. He had lost absolutely everything. Over $400,000 of their own money was gone forever. This massive loss was the true catalyst. This was why my family was acting so incredibly desperate. Jamal was drowning in debt, likely hiding the full extent of his financial ruin from my sister, and my grandparents' estate was his only possible way out. He desperately needed a massive influx of cash to cover his tracks, pay off his margin calls, and maintain the ridiculous illusion of his lavish lifestyle. I printed the transaction logs and added them to the growing physical file on my desk. His financial profile painted a pathetic picture of a man backed into a corner making increasingly reckless decisions. But losing his own money was only the beginning of the nightmare he was creating. I needed to know exactly how he funded that brand new Porsche in the driveway and the aggressive legal tactics my parents were using. I accessed the state real estate database and ran a title search on my grandparents' Lake Tahoe address. A massive red flag popped up immediately on my monitor. Just 2 days ago, a brand new lien had been recorded against the property. Jamal had approached a predatory private lending firm in Nevada, the kind of shadow lender that did not ask too many regulatory questions as long as the underlying collateral was massive. He had successfully taken out a $2 million commercial bridge loan. To secure that kind of money without a traditional credit check or income verification, he had presented the forged quitclaim deed as absolute proof that Brittany owned the $80 million estate outright. The loan terms were incredibly hostile, carrying a brutal 15% interest rate with a mandatory balloon payment due in exactly 90 days. He was burning through that borrowed cash at an astonishing rate. I pulled the disbursement records attached to the public filing. There was the 6-figure wire transfer to the luxury car dealership for the Porsche Cayenne. There was the $50,000 retainer paid to the shady family lawyer who filed the fake elder abuse injunction to freeze my bank accounts. And most chillingly, there was a $20,000 payment made to a private security and eviction firm known for conducting aggressive borderline illegal property seizures for desperate landlords. Jamal was not just planning to ask me to leave the house politely. He was actively hiring muscle to throw me out by physical force. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered the line. "Special Agent Miller," he said. "David," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "It is Rachel. We went to university together, surviving brutal accounting finals long before he joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation to specialize in white-collar financial crimes." "Rachel," he laughed, "it has been a while. Are you finally calling to confess to corporate tax fraud?" "Actually," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on my desk, "I am calling to hand you a textbook federal wire fraud and bank fraud case on a silver platter." I spent the next 20 minutes meticulously walking David through the entire sequence of events. I detailed the frozen bank accounts, the forged quitclaim deed transmitted to me via email across state lines, and the fraudulent $2 million commercial loan secured against a property Jamal did not actually own. I sent David the encrypted file containing the fake deed, the clumsy signature analysis, and the offshore financial ledgers. I heard him typing furiously on his keyboard on the other end of the line. "Rachel," he finally said, his tone shifting from friendly to completely serious. "This is not just wire fraud. This is major bank fraud and felony forgery. We have more than enough evidence to secure a warrant and arrest him right now at his house. I looked at the calendar on my desk, tracing the dates with my pen. No, I said softly. If we arrest him now, my family will immediately play the victim. They will cry to the media and claim it was a simple misunderstanding. I need him to fully commit to his crime. I need him to show up at the Tahoe property and attempt to enforce the forged document with his hired muscle. Let him take the final step into the trap. David sighed heavily, understanding exactly what I was doing and appreciating the airtight nature of the strategy. You want him caught red-handed attempting the illegal eviction using the forged federal documents? Exactly, I confirmed. David agreed to have his tactical team ready and waiting in Lake Tahoe. The board was officially set. I hung up the phone with David and took a deep breath. The next move belonged to Jamal and my family, and knowing their desperate need for validation, I expected a grand theatrical gesture. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, a heavy cream-colored envelope arrived via priority courier at my apartment building. Inside was a ridiculously pretentious invitation printed on thick, gold-foiled cardstock. It was an invitation to a private dining room at Le Petit Chaperon, one of the most exclusive and expensive Michelin-starred restaurants in downtown San Francisco. The text on the card made my stomach turn. Patricia and Richard request the honor of your presence at a victory dinner and family blessing, celebrating the rightful transfer of the Lake Tahoe estate to its true heirs, Brittany and Jamal. There was a handwritten note scrawled at the bottom in my mother's slanted, aggressive handwriting. Rachel, we are extending an olive branch. Come to dinner, sign the final settlement papers we discussed, and we will gracefully let you back into the family. The extended relatives will be there. Do not embarrass yourself by hiding. They had actually invited the aunts, uncles, and cousins to witness my supposed surrender. They were turning my grandfather's death and my financial ruin into a spectator sport. It was a calculated psychological tactic. They wanted the entire extended family to watch me concede, solidifying Brittany's status as the triumphant golden child and completely validating their fabricated story about my elder abuse. They assumed the massive peer pressure of a crowded high-end restaurant would force me to stay quiet, keep my head down, and sign away my life just to avoid making a scene. They were entirely wrong. I accepted the digital calendar invite sent by my father with a single click and immediately went to work. If my family wanted a public spectacle, I was going to give them an elite educational seminar on federal financial crimes. I walked over to my high-capacity office printer and loaded it with premium heavy bond paper. I was not going to present my findings like a panicked victim begging for mercy. I was going to present them exactly like a managing partner at a forensic accounting firm delivering a fatal audit. The printer hummed to life, churning out the physical, undeniable evidence of Jamal's absolute stupidity. First, I printed the complete ledger of Apex Pinnacle Holdings, highlighting the $400,000 catastrophic loss in the offshore cryptocurrency pump and dump scheme. I used a bright red marker to circle the final margin call, proving Jamal was entirely broke and desperate. Next, I printed the public county records of the $2 million commercial bridge loan, specifically highlighting the predatory 15% interest rate and the impending 90-day balloon payment. I made sure the page showing his signature and the fake deed used as collateral was crystal clear. Finally, I printed the forensic breakdown of the forged quitclaim deed. I included high-resolution, side-by-side comparisons of my grandfather's legitimate tremor affected signature against the smooth, digitally traced forgery Jamal had used. I added the proof of the Los Angeles notary stamp, dated on a day my grandparents were widely photographed at a charity gala in Chicago. I took all of these documents, organized them sequentially with professional legal index tabs, and slid them into a sleek black leather portfolio. This was my arsenal. There were no emotional pleas in this folder, no childhood grievances about who got more attention, and no desperate begging. There were only cold, hard facts that carried mandatory federal prison sentences. I dressed carefully for the evening, choosing a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit, a crisp white blouse, and minimal jewelry. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, the woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. I grabbed the leather portfolio, locked my apartment, and hailed a private car to the city. Le Petit Chaperon was a masterpiece of modern luxury, boasting dim ambient lighting, velvet booths, and an intimidatingly quiet atmosphere where the city elite conducted their business. When the hostess guided me toward the private dining room at the back, I could hear my family before I even saw them. The heavy oak double doors were slightly ajar, and loud raucous laughter was spilling out into the refined hallway. I paused outside, peering through the narrow gap. The scene inside was exactly as obnoxious as I had anticipated. Jamal was standing at the head of the long dining table wearing a flashy velvet dinner jacket, holding a glass of vintage champagne. He was loudly lecturing my Uncle Thomas about the supposed genius of real estate leveraging. Brittany was sitting next to him, snapping her fingers aggressively at a young server. "Excuse me," Brittany barked, her voice cutting sharply through the elegant room. "I asked for sparkling water with lime, not lemon. Are you physically incapable of following simple instructions? Take this back immediately and get me the manager." The young server apologized profusely, his face flushing bright red, and hurried away with the glass. Patricia and Richard sat nearby, beaming with absolute pride at their daughter's terrible behavior, entirely comfortable with humiliating service workers to flex their imaginary new wealth. The extended family, including aunts, uncles, and a few cousins, sat around the table looking a mixture of impressed and deeply uncomfortable. My mother was busy passing her phone around, showing off pictures of the new Porsche in their driveway, loudly bragging about Jamal's incredible business acumen and how he had saved the family legacy. Watching them treat the hard-working waitstaff like absolute garbage while spending criminally obtained money was the final confirmation I needed. Any lingering trace of familial guilt or hesitation vanished entirely from my mind. I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped into the private dining room, the black leather portfolio tucked firmly under my arm. The loud laughter slowly died down as the extended family noticed my arrival, turning to face me one by one. I walked gracefully to the only empty chair left at the far end of the long table and sat down, placing my black leather portfolio carefully next to my plate. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and suffocating until my mother decided it was time to break it. Patricia stood up, holding her champagne flute high and tapping it gently with a silver spoon to command everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," she began, projecting her voice so the entire room and possibly the waiters outside could hear. "We are gathered to celebrate the fact that justice always prevails. When my parents passed, we feared their legacy had been hijacked by manipulation. But thankfully, the truth came out, and the rightful heirs have been restored." She smiled warmly at Brittany and Jamal before turning her sharp gaze down the table toward me. "Rachel," she said, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive pity, "we know this transition has been difficult for you. You expected a windfall, and losing it must be a shock. But we are a family of grace. We do not want to see you on the streets. So Jamal and Brittany have generously agreed to offer you a $100,000 consolation prize. A fresh start. All you have to do is sign the final settlement papers tonight, drop any claims to the estate, and walk away quietly. Think of it as a severance package for your time spent managing your grandfather's affairs. Just sign, and we can all enjoy this beautiful meal in peace." Before I could even respond to my mother's insulting offer, Brittany leaned forward, making sure the light from the chandelier caught the massive, glittering diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. It was clearly a brand new purchase bought with the same fraudulent funds as the car. "You really should take the money," Brittany chimed in, swirling her sparkling water. "Look at you. You showed up to a Michelin star restaurant wearing a boring gray suit. You look like you are going to a funeral or a depressing corporate board meeting. $100,000 could buy you a whole new wardrobe, maybe even a personality that people actually like." A few of my cousins snickered into their napkins. Uncle Thomas, who had always been a spineless follower of my father, cleared his throat loudly. Listen to your mother and your sister Rachel, he said, trying to sound like a wise patriarch. Family is family. You tried to pull a fast one with the estate and you got caught. It happens. But Jamal is being incredibly generous by offering you anything at all. If I were him, I would have let you rot after what you pulled. Aunt Susan nodded in vigorous agreement, taking a large gulp of her wine. Take the deal, sweetheart, she urged. Stop being so greedy and stubborn. You owe your parents an apology for the stress you have caused them this week. Sign the paper, say you are sorry, and let us all eat. The pressure in the room was palpable, a synchronized attack designed to break my resolve. They thought I was surrounded, outnumbered, and completely outgunned. I let their voices wash over me, completely unaffected by their coordinated bullying. I slowly reached out and placed my hand flat on the cover of my black leather portfolio. I looked directly at Patricia, who was still standing with her champagne glass suspended in the air. I am going to decline your generous severance package, Mother, I said, my voice quiet but carrying a sharp edge that instantly silenced the murmurs of the extended family. Patricia frowned, slowly lowering her glass. Do not be a fool, Rachel, she warned. This is the only offer you are going to get. Jamal scoffed loudly from the head of the table. Let her be stubborn, Patricia. If she wants to fight us in court with $0 in her bank account, let her try. I will have the eviction team throw her belongings onto the sidewalk by Monday. I turned my gaze away from my mother and locked eyes entirely with Jamal. I opened the leather portfolio smoothly, turning to the first tabbed section. Tell me, Jamal, I asked casually, keeping my tone conversational. What is the current interest rate on a $2 million commercial bridge loan these days? Is it 12%? Or did that predatory shadow lender in Nevada hit you with a full 15% because of your terrible credit history? The arrogant smirk on Jamal's face vanished instantly. The color drained from his cheeks so fast he looked physically ill. I did not stop. And how exactly are you planning to make the mandatory balloon payment in 90 days? Because according to the public county records I pulled yesterday, that is a cool $2.3 million due in full by the end of the summer. The entire private dining room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Uncle Thomas froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. Brittany stared at Jamal, her eyes wide with sudden, uncomprehending panic. A bridge loan? Brittany echoed, her voice trembling slightly. Jamal, what is she talking about? Jamal opened his mouth, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between me and his wife. The velvet dinner jacket suddenly looked entirely too tight on his shoulders. My father stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. What kind of lies are you spinning now, Rachel? I pulled the printed public loan documents from my folder and slid them across the polished wooden table until they stopped in front of Uncle Thomas. I am not spinning anything, I replied. I am just wondering why a billionaire heir needs a high-interest loan to buy his wife a diamond necklace and a Porsche. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush them. I reached into my black leather portfolio again and pulled out a thick stack of printed financial ledgers. I did not just hand them to Jamal. I passed a copy to Uncle Thomas, who immediately put on his reading glasses and handed another stack down the table toward Aunt Susan. These are the complete transactional histories of Apex Pinnacle Holdings, I announced, ensuring every single person in the room heard me clearly over the soft jazz playing in the background. It is a shell company wholly owned and operated by Jamal. If you turn to page 4, you will see a highlighted column in bright red. That is the exact moment he lost over $400,000 of his own money in an offshore cryptocurrency pump and dump scheme just 3 weeks before my grandparents died. He is entirely broke. He has zero liquidity. I watched Brittany grab the papers from Uncle Thomas, her eyes frantically scanning the numbers. She gasped, dropping the papers onto her plate as if they burned her fingers. She looked at her husband with absolute terror. But the financial ruin does not stop with Jamal. I continued, turning my attention to my parents, who were sitting rigidly in their velvet chairs. I pulled out another set of documents and slid them down the polished wood. When you froze my bank accounts, you had to hire a lawyer willing to file an emergency injunction without holding a preliminary evidentiary hearing. Legitimate law firms do not do that. Only desperate, unethical attorneys do, and they charge a massive premium for the legal risk. You and Mom completely drained your joint retirement account to pay a $50,000 retainer to a lawyer who is currently under investigation by the state bar. You bet your entire life savings on Jamal winning a legal battle he has already lost. The illusion of the sophisticated victory dinner shattered entirely. The extended family began murmuring their previous supportive nods, replaced by horrified whispers. Aunt Susan pushed her plate away, looking physically sick as she stared at my mother. Uncle Thomas took off his glasses and glared at Richard. "You drained your retirement for this," he demanded loudly, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You lied to us about the inheritance." Jamal could not take it anymore. The polished, arrogant facade he had maintained for years cracked right down the middle. "Shut up," Jamal roared, his voice bouncing off the acoustic ceiling panels of the private dining room. He slammed both of his fists down onto the table with such violent force that the expensive china rattled loudly. Two crystal wine glasses tipped over, spilling dark red burgundy across the pristine white tablecloth. The liquid spread rapidly, dripping off the edge of the table and splashing onto the expensive carpet. Several cousins jumped back in their seats to avoid the mess. "Do not listen to a single word she is saying," Jamal screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "She is a liar. She manipulates numbers for a living to confuse people. I am the one holding the legal quitclaim deed, signed by her grandparents. It proves the Lake Tahoe estate belongs to Brittany. I own it. I used that deed to secure the loan, and everything is perfectly legal. You think some printed spreadsheets are going to stop me from taking what is mine? I already hired a private eviction firm. We are driving up to the mountain tomorrow morning, and I'm going to have my security team physically drag you out of that house by your hair if I have to. You are finished, Rachel." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or react to the wine seeping toward my leather portfolio. I simply closed the folder, picked it up, and stood from my chair. The contrast between his unhinged screaming and my absolute calm only amplified his panic. My mother was sobbing quietly into her cloth napkin, finally realizing the depth of the hole they had dug. Brittany was staring into space, clutching her new diamond necklace tightly, as if she suddenly realized it might soon be repossessed by a shadow lender. I looked around the room, making direct eye contact with the extended family members who had been so eager to pressure me into signing away my life just 10 minutes ago. None of them could meet my gaze. They all looked down at their plates or stared awkwardly at the spilled wine. I turned my attention back to Jamal, who was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his velvet jacket as he tried to stare me down. "You are right about one thing, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and chillingly polite. "You do have a piece of paper that you used to secure a massive federal loan, and you did hire a private team to enforce it. I am not going to argue with you here in front of an audience. I am not going to negotiate, and I am certainly not going to sign your ridiculous settlement offer. If you truly believe that deed is bulletproof, then I suggest you follow through on your threat." I smoothed the front of my gray suit and adjusted my grip on my portfolio. "I will be waiting for you at the Lake Tahoe house tomorrow morning. Bring your deed. Bring your security team. Bring whoever you want. Let us see exactly how the law handles your paperwork when you try to enforce it." I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors. As I pulled them open to leave, the silence of the room was violently broken by the sound of Brittany screaming at Jamal, demanding to know where their money went, followed by my father shouting over her. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to tear each other apart in a state of absolute paranoid rage. The drive from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe took nearly 4 hours, giving me plenty of time to decompress from the absolute chaos I had just left behind at the restaurant. By the time I pulled my sedan through the heavy iron gates of the estate, the sun had fully set, and the massive property was bathed in cool mountain moonlight. I parked in the circular driveway and stepped out, breathing in the scent of pine needles. The house was magnificent, a sprawling structure of glass, timber, and stone that looked out over the dark waters of the lake. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, turning on the minimal ambient lighting. I did not come up here to relax. I came up here to prepare a fortress. As soon as I set my overnight bag down, I went straight to the central control panel located in the main office. My grandfather had installed a state-of-the-art security system, but I had recently upgraded it with high-definition motion tracking cameras and audio recording capabilities. I pulled up the system dashboard on my laptop and meticulously checked every single camera angle. Camera 1 covered the main gate perfectly. Camera 2 had a sweeping view of the driveway where Jamal would inevitably park. Camera 3 was mounted directly above the heavy oak front door, providing a crystal-clear view of the porch. I adjusted the contrast and night vision settings to ensure absolute clarity. Next, I ran a comprehensive diagnostic on the property internet connection. If they showed up tomorrow with eviction thugs, Brittany would absolutely try to livestream the event to control the narrative. I needed the wireless internet to be incredibly strong to ensure my own continuous upload of the security footage to my remote cloud servers. I reset the main routers and tested the bandwidth on my phone. The connection was flawless and incredibly fast. The digital perimeter was secure, and every piece of evidence would be perfectly captured. I walked into the massive kitchen, poured myself a glass of iced water, and leaned against the granite counter, quietly waiting for the inevitable fallout. It did not take long. Just past midnight, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the granite countertop, shattering the mountain silence. The caller identification flashed my father's name. I let it ring 4 times before I finally swiped the screen to accept the call. I did not say hello. I just waited for him to speak. "Rachel, please do not hang up," Richard begged. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The stern, authoritative tone he had used on the front lawn last week and at the restaurant just hours ago was entirely gone. He sounded small, broken, and incredibly desperate. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background, telling me he was probably sitting alone in his car somewhere in the city. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked coldly. A heavy, ragged sob came through the speaker. He was actually crying. "The dinner was a disaster, Rachel. Jamal and Brittany got into a massive screaming match in the parking lot. Your mother is inconsolable." We went back to the house and I finally looked at the paperwork Jamal had been pushing on us. I looked at the retainer for the lawyer. "Rachel, we are ruined. We are completely financially destroyed." I took a slow sip of my water, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had gladly frozen my bank accounts to steal from me. "Why are you calling me at midnight to tell me this?" I asked. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Because you are the only one who can fix it. You have $80 million. You have more money than you could ever spend. Just give us $5 million. Just enough to pay off Jamal's terrible bridge loan so the private lenders do not come after our house, and enough to replenish my retirement account. I am your father, Rachel. I raised you. I paid for your childhood. You cannot just sit up there in that mansion and watch your own parents lose their home and go bankrupt. Please just wire the money and we will never bother you again. I am begging you to save us." I listened to his desperate crying, recognizing it for exactly what it was. It was not genuine remorse or love. It was just another manipulation tactic, a pathetic pivot from aggression to victimhood now that his initial plan had spectacularly failed. "Richard, you are not asking for a rescue," I told him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You are asking for an enabler. You want me to fund Jamal's criminal behavior and reward you and Patricia for trying to extort me. You gambled your entire financial future on a fraudulent scheme because your greed was louder than your common sense." He gasped, clearly shocked by my cold response. "But we are your family," he pleaded weakly. "Family does not commit perjury to freeze their daughter's grocery money," I countered sharply. "Family does not hire private thugs to throw their own flesh and blood onto the street. You made a series of terrible, calculated choices and now the bill has come due. Saving you from the consequences of your own malicious actions is not love. It is just funding your next attack. Do not call this number again." I pulled the phone away from my ear, ignoring his frantic screaming protests, and pressed the end call button. I blocked his number, just as I had already blocked Brittany, Jamal, and Patricia. The silence returned to the kitchen heavier but incredibly peaceful. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom, set my alarm for 6 in the morning, and lay down under the thick down comforter. The storm was coming exactly as I had orchestrated it, but for the first time in my entire life, I was not afraid of my family. I was ready to end them. At exactly 8 in the morning, the heavy silence of the mountain air was violently shattered. The deep rumble of heavy diesel engines echoed across the pristine lake as a massive white moving truck aggressively forced its way through the iron gates of the estate. It was closely followed by two matte black SUVs with heavily tinted windows kicking up gravel as they sped up the long approach. I watched the entire procession unfold in high definition from the multiple security monitors glowing in my office. They parked haphazardly on the circular driveway, their tires tearing deep trenches into the immaculate landscaping my grandfather had meticulously maintained for decades. The doors of the heavy SUVs swung open in unison, and four massive, heavily tattooed men stepped out into the crisp morning air. They were dressed in black tactical gear, combat boots, and utility belts, looking much more like a private mercenary unit than professional property managers. This was the shadow eviction team Jamal had hired with his fraudulent loan money, brought here specifically to intimidate me into submission. A moment later, Jamal emerged from the passenger side of the lead vehicle. He looked completely unhinged, but incredibly smug, wearing a designer leather jacket that was completely inappropriate for the mountain chill and clutching a thick manila envelope against his chest. Brittany stepped out right behind him, holding her smartphone high in the air, already angling the lens to catch her best side in the flattering morning light. My mother, Patricia, emerged from the second SUV, carrying an oversized designer tote bag on her shoulder, as if she was arriving for a luxurious weekend spa retreat, rather than an illegal, forced home invasion. My father was noticeably absent today, likely paralyzed by the panic of the previous night's desperate phone call, or perhaps finally realizing the catastrophic legal mistake he had made. The sheer audacity of the chaotic scene playing out on my digital screens was almost laughable. They had brought a literal army to terrorize a forensic accountant. Brittany immediately went to work treating my grandfather's driveway like her own personal reality television set. I reached out and turned up the audio feed on the exterior security cameras, letting their voices fill my office. "Good morning, everyone," Brittany said to her phone screen, her voice dripping with perfectly manufactured sorrow. "I am broadcasting live today because my family is going through an absolute nightmare and I need the world to see the truth. We are currently standing outside my late grandparents' beautiful Lake Tahoe estate. This house was legally left to me so I could raise my baby in a safe environment, but my sister Rachel has completely lost her mind." She turned the camera slowly to show the sprawling stone villa behind her, then pointed it directly toward the aggressive security team standing on the lawn. "My sister is currently squatting inside my property. She cruelly manipulated our grandparents when their minds were failing. She tried to steal our entire inheritance, and now she is refusing to leave the premises. My husband Jamal had to hire private security today just to ensure we can safely access our own home." Patricia eagerly stepped into the camera frame, wiping away non-existent tears from her perfectly contoured cheeks. "It breaks a mother's heart to see one daughter abuse the rest of the family like this," Patricia wailed softly for the live audience. "We tried so hard to offer her a generous financial settlement. We tried to give her money out of the goodness of our hearts just to make peace. But she is just so consumed by jealousy and greed." Brittany nodded dramatically, panning the camera back to her own face. "Please share this stream, guys. We want the whole world to see exactly who Rachel really is. We are taking our home back today, whatever it takes." I sat in my ergonomic office chair watching the performative grief unfold with absolute fascination. They were literally documenting their own federal crimes in real time. They were broadcasting their explicit intent to enforce a forged legal document to thousands of strangers on the internet. It was a forensic auditor's absolute dream scenario. They were handing me the final, undeniable pieces of evidence wrapped up in a neat digital bow. The theatrical performance on the lawn quickly shifted from a tearful internet broadcast into aggressive physical action. Jamal waved his hand sharply, signaling the 4 tactical enforcers to advance toward the house. They marched in unison up the wide stone steps, their heavy combat boots thudding ominously against the wooden porch. Jamal followed closely behind them, the manila envelope clutched tightly in his raised fist. Brittany and Patricia trailed just a few steps back, keeping the smartphone camera perfectly framed on the heavy front entrance. I stood up from my desk, smoothed down my crisp navy blue blazer, and walked unhurriedly down the hallway toward the grand foyer. Before I even reached the front of the house, the physical assault on the door began. The sound was absolutely deafening in the quiet house. "Open this door right now, Rachel, or I am calling the police and having them kick it in," Jamal roared, slamming his fists violently against the thick oak wood. The entire doorframe shuddered under the heavy impact. Through the reinforced glass panels, I could see his face twisted in pure anger, his heavy breath fogging up the cold morning glass. I stood perfectly still in the entryway, holding a warm mug of black coffee, just watching them throw their tantrum. "Open it right now," Jamal screamed again, kicking the heavy brass baseplate of the door. "I have the legal deed right here in my hand. You have exactly 5 minutes to grab your bags and walk out of here, or my guys are going to throw you right through a window." Patricia leaned eagerly into the camera frame. "Look at this, everyone," she yelled over the deafening noise. "Look at the daughter who is abusing her own family. She is trying to steal everything from us and leave her sister homeless on the street." The 4 enforcers shifted their weight aggressively, one of them pulling a heavy steel crowbar from his tactical utility belt. Jamal pointed an angry finger at the lock, instructing the massive man to start prying the reinforced deadbolt straight out of the wood. The tension was at its absolute peak. They genuinely believed they had won the war. They thought the sheer display of physical intimidation would break my nerve and send me running out the back door in a blind panic. I took one final sip of my coffee, set the mug down gently on the entryway console table, and took a deep, steadying breath. It was time to pull the trigger and end this charade permanently. I walked directly up to the door, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. The enforcer holding the steel crowbar paused, seeing me approach calmly through the glass. Jamal's eyes widened with a manic, triumphant gleam, assuming I was coming to surrender. I reached out my fingers, wrapping firmly around the cold, brass lock. With a loud, echoing click, I turned the heavy deadbolt and slowly pulled the thick oak door open, stepping out onto the porch to face my family. The moment I stepped across the threshold, the 4 massive private enforcers surged forward, their heavy combat boots pounding against the wooden planks of the porch. They formed a tight, intimidating semicircle around me, towering over my frame, attempting to use their sheer physical size to force me back inside. One of the men, a heavily bearded guy with a thick neck tattoo, crossed his massive arms and glared down at me, deliberately invading my personal space. The air was thick with the threat of immediate violence, a standard psychological tactic used by shadow eviction firms to terrify panicked tenants into leaving without a fight. But I was not a terrified tenant, and I did not take a single step backward. Instead, I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides, projecting an aura of absolute professional detachment. Seeing that his rented muscle was not having the desired effect, Jamal eagerly pushed his way through the wall of men. His face was flushed with adrenaline and a toxic sense of triumph. He thrust the thick manila envelope directly into my face, waving it so frantically that the paper crinkled loudly in the cold morning air. "This is it, Rachel!" Jamal shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the villa. "This is the official quitclaim deed signed by your grandparents just 2 days before they died. It legally transfers full and absolute ownership of this entire $80 million estate to Brittany. I have the ultimate legal authority here today. I have the paperwork, I have the financial backing, and I have the security team to enforce it. You have absolutely no ground to stand on." He pulled the forged document out of the envelope and shoved it inches from my nose, pointing aggressively at the digitally traced signatures at the bottom of the page. Read it and weep. You thought you could manipulate an old man on his deathbed and walk away with everything, but I outsmarted you. I secured the bridge loan, I hired the best property enforcement team in Nevada, and I am officially taking possession of this house right now. If you do not walk down those steps and get off my property, this exact second, these gentlemen are going to forcefully remove you, and I will not be held responsible for any injuries you sustain during the process. Before I could even blink, my mother, Patricia, pushed her way to the front of the group, her designer tote bag swinging wildly. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, her face contorted with a mixture of self-righteous anger and desperate greed. Hand over the keys right now, Rachel. Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with rage. Give us the keys and the alarm codes and walk away. If you force us to physically drag you out of here, I swear to God I will make sure you lose everything else in your life. I have already drafted a formal complaint to the State Board of Accountancy. The moment you are off this porch, I am submitting the elder abuse allegations to strip you of your CPA license. You will never work in the financial sector again. You will be a disgraced unemployed felon. I let her scream. I let Jamal wave his forged piece of paper. I let Brittany continue to narrate the entire pathetic showdown to her live stream audience, capturing every single threat and demand in high-definition video. I remained completely and utterly silent. I did not defend myself against the elder abuse claims. I did not point out the glaring errors in the fake deed. I simply watched them with the cold, analytical gaze of an auditor watching a massive corporate fraud unravel. My silence seemed to infuriate them even more. They expected tears, screaming, or desperate bargaining. They expected me to break down under the weight of their coordinated attack. By offering absolutely no resistance, I was starving them of the chaotic energy they needed to justify their actions. I was letting them dig the hole so deep that they would never be able to climb out. Jamal simply could not handle the quiet defiance. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight leather collar as he realized his intimidation tactics were failing miserably. Fine then, he spat, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. If you want to do this the hard way, we will do it the hard way. Jamal turned his back to me and gestured aggressively to the moving truck parked in the driveway. He shouted orders to the security team and the moving crew standing by the vehicles. Start breaking the front locks, Jamal commanded at the top of his lungs. Get your tools and tear the hinges off the front door if she tries to close it. Go inside and start packing up all of her personal belongings. If she gets in your way, restrain her and carry her off the property. The heavily tattooed enforcer with the steel crowbar took a menacing step toward the entryway, his grip tightening on the heavy metal tool. The other 3 men shifted into a tactical formation, ready to breach the threshold of my home. Brittany cheered loudly from the lawn, turning the camera to capture the impending home invasion. This was the moment of no return. They had explicitly crossed the line from a civil dispute into an attempted violent burglary. I slowly raised my right hand, holding it flat in the air directly between the advancing enforcer and my open front door. The simple authoritative gesture was so unexpected that the massive man actually hesitated, pausing his forward momentum. Jamal scoffed loudly. What are you doing, Rachel? Are you going to use your accounting magic to stop a crowbar? I lowered my hand, looked directly into Jamal's panicked, bloodshot eyes, and finally allowed a slow, genuine smile to spread across my face. The ultimate shift in power had officially begun. I reached into the pocket of my navy blue blazer and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was already unlocked, hovering over a single pre-programmed contact. I pressed the dial button once, letting it ring for a split second before hanging up. It was a silent signal, the exact ping David and I had agreed upon. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the cold certainty of the incoming federal raid settling over me like armor. Then I took a sudden, decisive step forward. The bearded enforcer instinctively flinched, not expecting the woman he was supposed to intimidate to march directly into his personal space. I slipped right past him and stood chest to chest with Jamal. Before his arrogant, adrenaline-fueled brain could even register my movement, I reached out and violently snatched the forged quitclaim deed right out of his sweaty hand. "Hey," Jamal yelled, stumbling back a half-step in pure surprise. "Give that back to me. That is a legal document." I held the heavy paper up in the morning light, examining the clumsy, digitally traced signatures of my grandparents at the bottom. I did not look angry. I did not look terrified. I looked at the paper, and then up at Jamal with profound, devastating pity. "You really thought you were a genius, Jamal?" I said softly, shaking my head. "You thought you could watch a few online tutorials on real estate, forge a couple of signatures, and steal an $80 million estate from a forensic accountant. You truly believed you were the smartest person in the room." Patricia scoffed loudly from the lawn, marching up the first 2 steps of the porch. "Give him back the deed, Rachel. Stop stalling. We all know it is real. We know they signed it before they got on that plane." I shifted my gaze to my mother, holding the paper up higher, so the smartphone camera Brittany was holding could capture it perfectly. "That is the problem, Mother," I announced, my voice ringing out with crystal clear authority. "Grandma and Grandpa could not have possibly signed this piece of paper 2 days before they died in that plane crash." Jamal sneered, crossing his arms aggressively over his chest. "Why not?" "Because you isolated them. Because you would not let them see a notary. I have the stamp to prove it is authentic." I laughed, a sharp, genuine sound that made the 4 private enforcers exchange uneasy glances. "Notaries can be bought, Jamal," I replied. "Signatures can be traced. But public property records and federal tax filings are absolute." I took a slow step closer to him, lowering my voice so he had to lean in to hear the exact moment his entire life shattered. "Grandma and Grandpa could not have legally transferred the ownership of this Lake Tahoe estate to Brittany 2 days before they died, because they have not owned this house in 5 years." The absolute silence that fell over the porch was deafening. The heavy morning breeze rustling through the pine trees was the only sound. Jamal's arrogant sneer froze completely on his face. His eyes darted rapidly from side to side, trying to process the words I had just spoken. "What are you talking about?" Brittany demanded from the lawn, the smartphone trembling slightly in her hand. "Of course they owned it. It was their house. They lived here." I turned to look directly into the camera lens. "They lived here, Brittany, but they did not own it. They did not own the investment portfolios, they did not own the commercial properties in the city, and they absolutely did not own this piece of land we are standing on. Let me give you the free financial education you so desperately need," I continued, my voice echoing like a judge reading a final verdict. 5 years ago, after Grandpa had his first stroke, I realized how incredibly vulnerable his assets were. I knew that if anything happened to his cognitive abilities, predatory vultures would swoop in and try to strip him of everything he had built. So, acting as his primary forensic accountant and sworn fiduciary, I executed a complete restructuring of his wealth. I legally transferred every single asset, including this $80 million Lake Tahoe estate, into an irrevocable blind trust registered under federal jurisdiction. I watched the blood completely drain from Jamal's face. The heavy leather jacket suddenly seemed to be suffocating him. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless sound came out. "An irrevocable blind trust means the original owners surrender all legal rights to the property," I explained slowly, making sure the private enforcers heard every single word. "Once the trust was formed, my grandparents became nothing more than beneficiaries living in a house owned by a corporate entity. I am the sole trustee. Therefore, it is legally, fundamentally, and entirely impossible for my grandparents to have signed a quitclaim deed transferring this property to you. You cannot give away a house you do not legally own." I tapped the forged paper with my index finger, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense air. "This document is a 100% confirmed forgery. You forged federal signatures to secure a $2 million commercial loan across state lines." You used a fake deed to hire these men to conduct an illegal eviction. You are standing on my porch holding the physical evidence of your own felony wire fraud. The bearded enforcer with the crowbar immediately took a large step backward, lowering his weapon as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. Jamal staggered back against the porch railing, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. The trap was fully sprung and there was absolutely no way out. The color vanished from Jamal's face so rapidly he looked as though he might pass out right there on the wooden decking. His chest heaved violently under his expensive leather jacket, gasping for thin mountain air that suddenly felt entirely insufficient. The thick manila envelope slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the porch with a soft thud that sounded deafening in the sudden tense silence. On the lawn, the performative tragedy Brittany had been broadcasting came to an abrupt, unceremonious halt. She slowly lowered her smartphone, her perfectly manicured thumb fumbling to end the live stream as the horrifying reality of my words penetrated her thick layer of entitlement. She looked from me to the bearded enforcer backing away, and finally to her husband, who was currently pressed against the porch railing, like a cornered animal. "What is she talking about?" Brittany whispered, her voice stripped of all its previous bravado. "Tell her she is lying, Jamal. Just tell her it is the lie." But Jamal could not speak. He was too busy staring at the forged quitclaim deed I still held loosely in my hand, realizing it was not a golden ticket to $80 million, but a direct one-way ticket to federal prison. I smoothed the crinkled paper, ensuring the digital signatures were clearly visible to everyone present. Under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1344, committing bank fraud to obtain assets exceeding $1 million carries a maximum penalty of 30 years in federal prison. I recited, my voice echoing with the detached precision of a seasoned legal expert. "And because you transmitted this forged document to me via email across state lines, you triggered Section 1343 wire fraud. You did not just forge a family document. You attempted to extort an irrevocable blind trust protected by federal law. And you used the internet to secure a fraudulent commercial loan from a state-regulated financial institution. You have triggered an automatic federal investigation." The private security enforcers exchanged panicked looks. These men were used to bullying scared tenants, not participating in high-level corporate espionage and federal bank fraud. The bearded leader took another massive step backward, completely lowering his steel crowbar. "We want no part of this," the enforcer growled, glaring at Jamal. "You told us this was a standard legally sanctioned eviction. You did not tell us the paperwork was fake. We are not going down for federal felonies." Patricia, sensing the complete collapse of their aggressive takeover, desperately tried to salvage the situation. She pushed past Brittany and marched up to the bottom of the porch steps, her face pale but her eyes still flashing with stubborn denial. "You are bluffing, Rachel," my mother shouted, though her voice shook violently. "You are just throwing around big legal words to scare us. Even if that deed is fake, we still have the elder abuse injunction. We still froze your accounts. We will drag you through the family courts for years until you are bankrupt. You will never work as a CPA again once I file that ethics complaint." I looked down at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "You really do not understand the gravity of what you have done," I replied, shaking my head. "That elder abuse injunction was your most catastrophic mistake. You and Richard signed sworn affidavits claiming I manipulated my grandparents into changing their will. But because the trust has owned the estate for 5 years, there was no recent will to change, and there were no personal assets to steal. You lied to a federal judge to place a hold on accounts affiliated with a blind trust." I took a slow step closer to the edge of the porch, looking directly down into my mother's terrified eyes. "By submitting those fraudulent claims electronically to the court system in an attempt to financially paralyze me, you committed another count of wire fraud. You and Dad did not just engage in a messy family dispute over an inheritance. You engaged in a coordinated criminal conspiracy. You committed perjury, extortion, and fraud. You are not going to revoke my CPA license, Patricia. You are going to be a co-defendant in a federal indictment." Jamal finally found his voice, though it was nothing more than a pathetic broken stammer. He pushed himself off the porch railing, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. "Wait, Rachel. Just wait a minute," Jamal pleaded, his arrogant swagger entirely replaced by frantic begging. "This is all just a massive misunderstanding. I did not know the house was in a trust. I swear to you I did not know. I was just trying to make sure my wife got what she rightfully deserved. I was trying to protect my family. The guy who helped me with the paperwork told me it was completely legal. We can fix this. I will call the bank right now and cancel the bridge loan. I will tell them I made a mistake. Just give me the deed back and we will tear it up right here on the porch. We can just walk away and pretend none of this ever happened. I will tell the security team to go home. Just let us leave Rachel. Please, do not ruin my life over a stupid mistake." He reached out, his trembling fingers grasping at the empty air between us, desperately hoping I would hand over the physical evidence of his crimes. I took a step back, folding the forged document and slipping it safely into the inside pocket of my blazer. "It is entirely too late for that, Jamal," I told him, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You cannot unring a bell of this magnitude. You took out a $2 million loan. You bought a luxury car. You hired armed men to break into my home and throw me onto the street. You only want to apologize now because you realize the gun you pointed at my head is going to blow up in your own hands." Brittany burst into loud, hysterical sobs on the lawn, dropping her phone onto the grass. She clutched her head, screaming at Jamal, asking him what he had done to them. Patricia stood frozen on the steps, her mouth open in a silent scream, as the reality of the impending federal charges finally washed away her entitlement. Jamal fell to his knees on the wooden porch, crying openly, begging me to call my lawyer and fix it. But I did not need to call anyone, because in that exact moment, slicing clearly through the crisp mountain air and Brittany's hysterical sobbing, came a sound that froze the blood in all of their veins. It was the faint, high-pitched, and unmistakable wail of approaching police sirens echoing rapidly across the dark waters of the lake. The wail of the sirens grew exponentially louder, bouncing off the dense pine trees and shattering whatever remained of Jamal's false reality. Within seconds, 3 unmarked black SUVs, outfitted with flashing red and blue strobe lights, tore through the open iron gates of the estate. They did not park politely on the circular driveway. They aggressively swerved onto the manicured lawn, intentionally forming a tactical blockade right behind the massive white moving truck, completely trapping the private enforcers and my family's vehicles. The doors of the federal vehicles flew open before they had even fully stopped. Men and women wearing heavy tactical vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation poured out, their movements swift and highly coordinated. David, my former university classmate and current special agent, led the charge. He stepped out of the lead vehicle, holding a thick stack of manila folders, his face a mask of absolute authority. Federal agents immediately fanned out across the property, establishing a secure perimeter. The bearded private enforcer on the porch immediately threw his hands into the air, dropping his steel crowbar onto the wooden deck with a loud clatter. "We are just contractors," the enforcer shouted, taking several steps away from Jamal. "We had no idea this was a federal situation." David ignored the contractors and walked briskly up the wide stone steps, flanked by 2 heavily armed agents. He stopped right in front of Jamal, who was still paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of federal law enforcement. Jamal David said, his voice crisp and carrying across the silent yard. "Stand up and step away from the residence. We are executing a federal arrest warrant." Jamal scrambled awkwardly, his expensive leather jacket suddenly looking like a cheap costume. His eyes darted around the yard, taking in the flashing lights and the agents securing his tactical eviction team. He immediately reverted to the only defense mechanism he knew, launching into a frantic, slick sales pitch. "Officer, listen to me." Jamal started, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "This is a massive misunderstanding of corporate leverage. I am a real estate investor. I was simply executing a high-yield bridge loan based on an anticipated transfer of generational wealth. The documentation might have a minor clerical error regarding the trust parameters, but my intent was entirely aligned with standard market practices. We can settle this civilly without federal involvement. David did not even blink at the ridiculous barrage of investor jargon. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You do not have a clerical error," Jamal David replied flatly. "You have a forged federal document, a fraudulent $2 million commercial loan, and multiple counts of wire fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Jamal's slick facade completely crumbled. He backed away, shaking his head frantically. "No, wait. Let me call my lawyer. You cannot just arrest me over a family misunderstanding. I did not know about the blind trust. I was acting in good faith to secure my wife's assets." Two federal agents immediately stepped forward, grabbing Jamal by the arms and firmly spinning him around. They marched him off the porch and straight toward the driveway. They did not gently place him into the back of an SUV. They pushed him face first onto the sleek dark hood of the brand new Porsche Cayenne he had purchased with the stolen money. The metal buckled slightly under his weight. Jamal let out a pathetic yelp as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists, locking him in place. He was pinned against the ultimate symbol of his own greed. The luxury car transformed instantly into his own personal holding cell. He squirmed against the hood, shouting for Brittany to call his financial advisors, to call anyone who could stop the nightmare. On the lawn, Brittany completely lost whatever fragile grip on reality she had left. She watched her husband, the man who had promised her endless wealth and a life of absolute luxury, getting forcefully handcuffed to a car. The smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the damp grass with a dull thud. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream that echoed terribly across the property. "Jamal!" she shrieked, sprinting toward the driveway with her arms outstretched. "What are you doing to him? Let him go! He did not do anything wrong. This is Rachel's fault. She set us up." One of the agents immediately stepped into Brittany's path, holding a firm hand up to stop her frantic charge. "Ma'am, you need to step back immediately," the agent ordered. Brittany ignored him, thrashing wildly, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, smearing thick black mascara across her cheeks. The golden child, who had spent her entire life having every whim catered to, was entirely incapable of processing a boundary she could not manipulate. She collapsed onto her knees in the driveway, gravel sobbing uncontrollably, her designer clothes instantly ruined by the dirt. Patricia, seeing her favorite daughter hyperventilating on the ground, and her son-in-law in federal custody, charged forward with her oversized tote bag swinging. "This is an outrage," Patricia screamed, her face contorted with maternal fury. "Do you know who we are? We are upstanding citizens. My daughter is the victim here. Rachel is a manipulative, vindictive liar who stole our family inheritance. I am going to have all of your badges for this. I demand you release him immediately." David turned away from Jamal and walked slowly toward my mother. He stopped just inches away from her, his expression hardening into pure ice. "Ma'am," David said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register. "You and your husband filed false affidavits in a federal court to freeze trust-affiliated assets. We are currently reviewing those documents for perjury charges. If you take one more step toward my agents, or if you continue to interfere with an active federal arrest, I will place you in handcuffs for obstruction of justice and accessory to wire fraud. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" Patricia froze instantly. The threat of her own arrest shattered her aggressive entitlement. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish out of water. She slowly lowered her hands, taking a trembling step backward, her eyes wide with sudden absolute terror. She looked at Jamal, who was sobbing openly against the hood of the Porsche. She looked at Brittany, who was a crumpled, hysterical mess in the driveway dirt. And finally, she looked up at me, standing calmly on the porch of the $80 million estate they had tried to steal. The sheer devastating humiliation of the moment was absolute. The family that had prided itself on appearances, on country club status, and on toxic superiority was completely exposed. Their neighbors, their friends, and Brittany's entire internet audience had just witnessed their spectacular downfall. They were not victims. They were criminals, publicly dismantled and stripped of every illusion they had ever held. I watched David read Jamal his Miranda rights, feeling the cold mountain breeze sweep across the porch, washing away decades of their toxic control. Brittany dragged herself across the damp gravel of the driveway, completely abandoning any remaining shred of her manufactured dignity. She scrambled toward the bottom of the porch steps where I stood, her expensive designer dress tearing against the sharp stones. Her blonde hair, usually styled to absolute perfection for her internet followers, was a tangled, wild mess, clinging to her tear-soaked face. "Rachel, please," she sobbed hysterically, reaching out to grab the hem of my navy blue blazer with trembling hands. "Tell them to stop right now. Tell them it is all a big mistake. You are my sister. You cannot let them take Jamal away in handcuffs. Who is going to provide for my baby? Who is going to pay our credit card bills? Just tell the agents you dropped the charges, and we can work it out privately." I looked down at the golden child, the woman who had spent her entire life taking whatever she wanted and destroying anyone who stood in her way. I did not pull away from her grasp immediately, but I did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. I looked directly into her frantic, bloodshot eyes, watching her desperately try to deploy the same tears she had always used to manipulate our parents. "I do not control the federal government, Brittany," I stated calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You did this. You and Jamal decided to forge legal documents. You decided to commit bank fraud to buy diamond necklaces and luxury cars. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not care about our toxic family dynamics, and they absolutely do not drop felony charges just because you are crying on my front lawn. The machine is in motion, and nothing you say or do will stop it now." She let go of my blazer and collapsed forward into the dirt, burying her face in her hands as her wails echoed against the stone facade of the villa. While Brittany completely unraveled on the ground, the private security contractors realized exactly how precarious their own legal situation had become. The heavily tattooed leader, who just 20 minutes ago was fully prepared to pry my front door open with a steel crowbar, rapidly approached Special Agent David. The enforcer held his hands up high, palms open, in a universal gesture of surrender and compliance. "Listen to me very closely," the contractor said, his voice stripped of all its previous intimidation. "We are a licensed property management enforcement team operating out of Reno. We were hired by Jamal under the explicit guarantee that his paperwork was legally sound and approved by the county clerk. We had absolutely no idea that deed was a forgery, and we definitely did not know this was a federal trust property. We want zero part of this operation." David looked the massive man up and down, clearly unimpressed by the sudden pivot from aggressive thug to innocent bystander. "Get your men off this property immediately," David ordered, signaling to another agent to photograph their license plates. "If we find out your firm had any prior knowledge of the wire fraud, we will be serving you with federal arrest warrants by the end of the week." The contractor did not need to be told twice. He turned and whistled sharply to his three heavily armed colleagues. They sprinted toward their matte black SUVs, tossing their tactical gear and steel tools into the trunks with frantic urgency. The engines roared to life, tires spinning and kicking up dirt as they desperately maneuvered around the federal vehicles blocking their path. The driver of the massive white moving truck, realizing he was also standing in the middle of an active federal crime scene, threw his vehicle into reverse. The heavy truck slowly and awkwardly backed out of the circular driveway, its backup alarm beeping loudly, providing a pathetic soundtrack to the complete disintegration of Jamal's aggressive takeover. Within 60 seconds, the imposing army my family had brought to terrorize me had completely abandoned them. Just as the moving truck cleared the heavy iron gates, a silver sedan screeched to a halt at the edge of the property line. My father Richard stumbled out of the driver's side, his face ashen and his breathing ragged. He had clearly rushed up the mountain after his panicked midnight phone call to me, arriving just in time to witness the absolute destruction of his family. He walked numbly onto the lawn, stopping next to my mother Patricia, who was still standing completely frozen near the porch steps. They both watched in horrifying silence as federal agents placed Jamal into the back of a black SUV, slamming the heavy door shut and trapping him inside. Richard looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and profound regret. I stepped down onto the first step of the porch, looking directly at the two people who had raised me, the parents who had willingly sacrificed my financial security to fund their favorite daughter's delusions. You thought draining your retirement accounts to pay a shady lawyer was your biggest financial mistake? I told them, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet yard. But you forgot how thoroughly I investigate financial records before I make a move. Patricia flinched, her hands gripping her oversized tote bag so tightly, her knuckles turned white. What do you mean? Richard whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. I looked at him with absolute pity. Jamal had terrible credit, Richard. He lost everything in that offshore crypto scam. Even with a forged deed, no commercial lender was going to hand him a $2 million bridge loan without reliable guarantors. You and Patricia wanted this luxurious lifestyle for Brittany so badly that you co-signed that high-interest loan. You put your own names and your own home on that fraudulent application. Richard gasped, clutching his chest, as if he had been physically struck by a heavy blow. Patricia let out a strangled cry, dropping her designer bag into the grass as she finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of their choices. Jamal is going to federal prison, I continued, relentlessly ensuring every word landed with devastating precision. That means he is going to default on that massive loan. And when the shadow lenders realize the collateral they accepted was a forged document on a blind trust, they are going to come directly after the guarantors to recoup their $2 million. They are going to come after you. I watched the final remnants of their pride completely evaporate. You are going to lose your house, I concluded, my tone entirely factual. The bank will foreclose on it to settle the massive debt. You are going to lose everything, and you have absolutely no one to blame but yourselves. The house of cards had completely collapsed, leaving them standing broken and humiliated in the ruins of their own extraordinary greed. 1 month later, the crisp mountain air of Lake Tahoe had given way to the stifling, oppressive heat of midsummer, a perfect reflection of the absolute hell my family now found themselves trapped in. The fallout from that disastrous morning on my front porch was swift, catastrophic, and completely public. The federal justice system does not move with the sluggish, forgiving pace of family court. It moves like a heavily armored tank, crushing everything in its path. Jamal learned this lesson the hard way. During his initial arraignment hearing at the federal courthouse in San Francisco, his slick defense attorney pleaded desperately for pretrial release. He argued that Jamal was a dedicated family man and a respected investor who simply made a clerical error. The federal judge, holding the meticulously organized binder of evidence I had provided to Special Agent David, was entirely unamused. Given Jamal's recent liquidation of assets into offshore, untraceable cryptocurrency exchanges, and his documented connections to shadow lending syndicates, the judge officially deemed him an extreme flight risk. Bail was aggressively denied. Jamal was stripped of his tailored velvet jackets and issued a standard orange jumpsuit. He was transferred to a high-security federal detention center, where he currently sits awaiting a trial that his own lawyer admits is completely unwinnable. The combined charges of wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery carry a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. His arrogant empire of leveraged debt and imaginary wealth had been reduced to a 6 by 8 foot concrete cell. No amount of smooth talking could negotiate his way out of the heavy iron bars. He was completely isolated, abandoned by those he tried to impress. This harsh new reality was his permanent future, a cage built by his own hands. There was no escape. With Jamal locked away in federal custody, Brittany's glamorous, completely fabricated life evaporated practically overnight. The moment the federal investigation was officially launched, the government moved swiftly to freeze every single financial account connected to Jamal's name and his shell companies. This included their joint checking accounts, their high-yield savings, and every credit card Brittany had been using to fund her ridiculous designer shopping sprees. The Porsche Cayenne she had been bragging about to the neighbors was immediately impounded by federal agents as evidence of criminal proceeds. Without access to Jamal's fraudulently obtained funds or my parents' drained bank accounts, the stark reality of her situation came crashing down. The lease on their expensive suburban rental home was terminated after she missed her first payment. The landlord, seeing the chaotic news coverage of Jamal's arrest, demanded she vacate the premises immediately. Brittany, the golden child who had never lifted a finger to work a single day in her adult life, found herself entirely destitute. She was forced to pack whatever clothes she could carry into garbage bags and move into a cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The luxury spas, the five-star Michelin dinners, and the diamond necklaces were instantly replaced by peeling wallpaper, dripping faucets, and the terrifying prospect of true independence. To survive and pay her weekly motel rent, Brittany had to do something she considered absolutely beneath her. She had to get a minimum wage job. She was hired as a front-end cashier at a local discount grocery store. The irony was incredibly sharp. The woman who had publicly humiliated a young waiter at an elite restaurant just weeks prior was now wearing a stained polyester uniform, standing on her feet for 8-hour shifts and enduring the impatient complaints of angry customers. Her manicured nails chipped and broke from handling heavy cans and bagging groceries. Her social media accounts, once filled with heavily filtered photos of her luxurious lifestyle and dramatic, tearful live streams playing the victim, went completely dark. She could not bear the intense public humiliation of her former friends and wealthy acquaintances watching her dramatic fall from grace. Every time she scanned a barcode or handed back crumpled change, she was painfully reminded that she had traded $80 million in family loyalty for a criminal husband and a life of absolute poverty. Her entitlement was completely crushed. While Brittany was learning the harsh reality of minimum wage labor, my parents were facing their own catastrophic financial reckoning. The shadow lending syndicate in Nevada did not care that Jamal was sitting in a federal prison cell. They only cared about recovering their $2 million loan, and they immediately activated the default clauses in the contract. Because Patricia and Richard had eagerly co-signed that bridge loan to fund Brittany's luxurious lifestyle, they were held fully legally responsible for the massive debt. The bank moved with ruthless efficiency. Within 3 weeks, formal foreclosure notices were aggressively nailed to the front door of their pristine suburban house. The family that had built their entire identity around maintaining the appearance of flawless wealth was suddenly exposed to the entire neighborhood. Mrs. Gable, the local gossip who had previously admired Brittany's new Porsche, now watched from her window as moving trucks arrived to repossess my parents' expensive furniture and luxury vehicles. The public social fallout was absolutely merciless. My parents were immediately excommunicated from their elite country club, their memberships revoked, not just because they could no longer afford the exorbitant monthly dues, but because their association with a high-profile federal fraud case was considered incredibly toxic. Their wealthy friends, the same aunts and uncles who had proudly pressured me to surrender at the Michelin star dinner, completely cut off all contact. Absolutely no one answered my mother's frantic, weeping phone calls. Not a single person offered them a guest house to stay in. They were treated like social pariahs, ostracized by the very community they had spent decades trying to impress. At 60 years old, Richard and Patricia were officially bankrupt, entirely homeless, and utterly alone, their carefully curated legacy entirely destroyed by their own insatiable greed and malicious betrayal. Another 2 weeks passed, bringing the scorching heat of late July to the mountains. The quiet solitude of the Lake Tahoe estate was a welcome relief after the chaotic public spectacle of my family's financial ruin. I was sitting in my home office reviewing a client portfolio when the sharp, sudden buzz of the main gate intercom shattered the silence. I glanced at the security monitor on my desk. Standing outside the heavy iron gates was a woman I almost did not recognize. It was my mother, Patricia. The transformation was startling. The perfectly tailored designer outfits and immaculate blowouts were completely gone. She was wearing a faded, wrinkled linen blouse and oversized sunglasses that could not hide the deep, dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single month. The heavy designer tote bag she used to carry like a weapon was replaced by a cheap, frayed canvas sack slung over her shoulder. The complete destruction of her false reality was fully written on her tired face. She pressed the intercom button again, her hand visibly shaking. I unmuted the microphone, but did not open the gate. "What do you want, Patricia?" I asked, my voice echoing metallic and cold through the outdoor speaker. "Rachel, please!" My mother gasped, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "Please let me in. The bank officially took the house yesterday. They locked the doors. Your father packed his bags and went to stay on his brother's couch, but Uncle Thomas flatly refused to let me in. He blames me for the public embarrassment. Brittany is crammed into that awful motel and told me she cannot afford another mouth to feed. I have nowhere else to go. I have $20 to my name and half a tank of gas." I stared at the high-definition monitor, watching the woman who had proudly commanded country clubs reduced to begging on the side of a mountain road. She looked up at the camera, her hands clasped together in a pathetic, pleading gesture. "I know the estate has a guest house by the water, Rachel. I will stay out of your way entirely. I will clean the property. I will cook your meals. Just please let me live in the guest house. You cannot leave your own mother out here on the street. I have absolutely nothing left today." I sat back in my ergonomic chair looking at her desperate face on the digital screen. Any other daughter might have felt an overwhelming obligation to rescue the woman who gave birth to her. But forensic accountants are trained to identify toxic liabilities, and my mother was the ultimate bad investment. I leaned forward and pressed the microphone button again. "You do not have nothing left because of bad luck, Patricia," I stated clearly, stripping every ounce of sympathy from my tone. "You have nothing left because you gambled your entire life on a fraudulent scheme designed to destroy me. You watched me suffer at the hospital while Grandpa was dying, choosing to drink margaritas on a luxury vacation instead of supporting us. When the lawyer read the true will, you immediately filed fake legal documents to freeze the bank accounts I needed to survive." My mother flinched at the sound of the speaker. "I was just trying to protect your younger sister," she sobbed loudly. I did not let her use her favorite excuse. "Being a good mother to Brittany did not require you to hire armed men to break my doors down. It absolutely did not require you to smile and cheer while Jamal waved a forged federal document in my face. You wanted me homeless, bankrupt, and stripped of my professional accounting license. You stood right out there on my front porch and threatened to destroy my career out of pure spite. You tried to ruin my entire existence simply because I refused to be your compliant victim anymore. Family is not just about sharing blood or a last name. Family is about mutual respect, honesty, and protecting one another from harm. By that definition, Patricia, we have not been a family for a very long time." Patricia pressed her hands against the cold iron bars of the gate, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Please, Rachel," she begged, her voice barely a whisper through the outdoor microphone. "I am your mother. You cannot just turn your back on me. I promise I will change. I will do whatever you want." I watched her through the security camera, feeling the last remaining threads of our biological connection snap and dissolve into nothing. "I am not turning my back on you, Patricia," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and resolute. "I am simply enforcing the boundary that you forced me to build. You made your choices when you co-signed that fraudulent loan to steal from me. Now you have to live with the consequences of those choices. The guest house is not available to you. The main house is not available to you. My financial resources are permanently off limits. You need to get back in your car and drive away. You need to seek help from the country club friends you tried so hard to impress, or you need to figure out how to survive on your own. But you are never stepping foot on this property again." I did not wait for her to formulate another pathetic excuse or launch into another desperate plea. I reached out and pressed the red button on the control console, completely disabling the intercom system. The audio feed cut off instantly, plunging my home office back into peaceful silence. I sat at my desk and watched the digital monitor. Patricia stood there for 5 full minutes, her hands gripping the iron bars, sobbing silently in the mountain heat. When she finally realized the heavy gate was remaining firmly closed, she turned around, got into her car, and drove away forever. That evening, long after the dust from my mother's departure had settled, I walked down the gentle wooden slope that led to the private dock of the Lake Tahoe estate. The sun had just dipped below the jagged mountain peaks, painting the sky in deep hues of violet and burnt orange. I carried a single glass of Pinot Noir, my footsteps echoing softly against the worn timber planks, until I reached the very end of the pier. I sat down, dangling my legs over the cool, dark water, and simply listened to the profound quiet. For the first time in my 33 years of life, the silence was not laced with the anxiety of anticipating the next family crisis, the next insult, or the next unreasonable demand. It was just pure, unadulterated peace. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the cool mountain breeze wash over me as I finally allowed myself to process the agonizing reality of the past few months. Society conditions us to believe that blood is thicker than water, that family is an unbreakable bond you must endure no matter how much it damages your soul. We are taught to forgive endlessly, to turn the other cheek, and to constantly shrink ourselves to accommodate the fragile egos of the people who share our genetics. But sitting there on the dock, looking out across the vast expanse of the lake, I realized the absolute danger of that mentality. Cutting off your own parents and your sister is not a victory to be celebrated with joy. It is an incredibly painful, agonizing emotional surgery. It is the deliberate amputation of a diseased limb. The procedure itself is traumatic. It leaves a permanent scar, and you grieve the loss of the healthy limb you always wished you had. But that amputation is entirely necessary if you want to survive. If I had not severed those ties, the toxic infection of their greed and entitlement would have eventually consumed my entire life. I had to choose between saving their manufactured illusions or saving my own sanity, and for the first time I chose myself without a single ounce of regret. The emotional wound of losing the family I never truly had was already beginning to heal, replaced by a fierce protective independence that nobody could ever forge or steal from me. In the months that followed that final confrontation at the gate, my life transformed in ways I had only ever dreamed of. With the relentless shadow of my parents and sister finally lifted, I threw myself entirely into the true purpose of the blind trust my grandfather and I had built together. The $80 million estate was never meant to be a piggy bank for luxury cars and country club dues. It was a vehicle for substantial generational impact. I expanded my forensic accounting firm, using my expertise to audit and dismantle predatory shadow lending syndicates, just like the one Jamal had foolishly tangled with. More importantly, I began directing significant portions of the trust yields into local community grants, funding financial literacy programs for vulnerable young adults and providing secure housing initiatives for the elderly. I was honoring my grandparents' legacy through action, not through empty boasting at a Michelin star restaurant. And as I rebuilt my professional and philanthropic life, I also rebuilt my personal world. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the massive void left by my biological relatives was quickly filled by a chosen family of incredible, genuine people. I hosted Thanksgiving dinner at the Lake Tahoe house that year, but the dining table was not filled with entitled relatives waiting to tear me down. Instead, it was surrounded by trusted colleagues, close friends from university like David, and the brilliant mentors who had supported me when my own parents abandoned me. We laughed loudly, drank excellent wine, and shared stories without a single ounce of underlying tension or manipulation. I realized that true family is entirely voluntary. It is comprised of the people who celebrate your successes, respect your boundaries, and sit beside you in the dark without asking what they can extract from you in return. I was finally breathing free air, unburdened by the heavy chains of being the family scapegoat. Now, I want to turn the conversation over to you. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you had to enforce strict, non-negotiable boundaries with toxic relatives? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally because their love came with a price tag you could no longer afford to pay? The decision to step away from family is one of the most isolating and terrifying choices a person can make, and society often makes us feel guilty for simply protecting our own peace. I would love to hear your stories of resilience and survival in the comments below. How did you find the strength to stand your ground when everyone expected you to fold? Share your experiences because you never know who is reading the comments desperately needing the exact validation you can provide. If my journey resonated with you, or if you found satisfaction in watching absolute accountability catch up to those who thought they were above the rules, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with anyone in your life who might need a reminder that setting a firm boundary is not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound self-respect. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredibly personal journey, and remember this above all else. Your worth is not determined by the people who consistently fail to see it. You do not owe your success, your peace, or your sanity to anyone who treats you like an accessory to their own ego. Protect your space, hold your ground, and never be afraid to close the door on toxicity. Until next time, stay strong.